master your craft or acquire a skill and become really great at it, then learn how to promote and market it and get it out there in the world, then wait another 5 to 10 years for it to actually get the results you want it to get.
Yeah, it's like investing. Like first you have to make capital, like earn wages, you have capital. Then you have to find the opportunity, the thing you invest in. Then you have to wait.
Wait 5, 10 years till you make some money.
Yeah, compounding returns, interest, like you just have to let time do its work.
And I don't know if you're like me, 10 years ago, I invested in a lot of things that never made money, that I lost all the money. So you have to make a lot of mistakes through the lessons of promoting, marketing, or putting yourself out in the second marathon.
Yeah.
In the third marathon of just waiting around for time to pass.
And then what if your thing is like really ahead of its time? Right? Then you have to wait even longer.
Then no one cares. Yeah, you have to wait longer.
You might even be dead.
I kind of feel like Masking Masculinity for me was a little ahead of its time. It came out like right when Me Too was happening. And they're like, oh, we don't want to listen to a guy talking about vulnerability. We just want to yell at men.
Yeah.
Or expose the men who have actually done the really hard things, the really bad things. And men weren't looking to find the answers or seek within. And so now I see it having like a second wave 4 years later where people are like buying it, sharing it. They're like, wow, this is really powerful to understand this.
Well, there's this expression that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And so the difference I found, like you work really hard, you make something, it's objectively good, but then timing is not perfectly right. It doesn't fail. It's like a single. But then when you have something and it's exactly timed to the moment, then it's a home run. Or your thing is just kind of floating there waiting for the moment. So like I saw this I've been writing about stoicism, and so resiliency and obstacles and also stillness. These things, they worked, but then, March 2020, they take on a different relevance to people. And suddenly
6 years ago, they weren't as powerful.
Yeah, and now also suddenly people have time.
Right.
And so
to do a daily meditation.
So then it's like, you can either get a second life or a third life. And so I think the important part is like, you do the work, you put yourself out there, you have to trust that it's going to work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, it's a grind.
I have a thesis that if you want to overcome your fears, you have to go all in on it. I don't think you can outthink your fear. You have to go all in your fear in order for the fear to start to disappear.
Okay.
And you've got to have a lot of courage in order to face the thing that you're insecure about, that you're afraid of, people judging you, that you're afraid of failing or falling down on your face.
Sure.
But once you overcome it, or at least you're able to face it in a comfortable stance, maybe you're never fully comfortable, but at least you're like, I can do the thing. That's when I feel like your greatest gift can come to the world, or that's where I feel like there's so much reward on the other side. But it's extremely scary to face our fears. Why do you think it's so hard for people to face their insecurities, their shame, their fears, their doubts?
Well, if it wasn't scary, then like courage wouldn't need to be there. So like it's good that you're afraid, right? Like I guess one way to think about it is like if there wasn't a risk, let's say it's starting a business. If like all you had to do was like have an idea for a business and then it was guaranteed that you'd be successful, then there'd be a lot more businesses, right? Like everyone would do it. So the fact that it's scary is partly what makes it valuable, because most people are not going to get over the fear. So like when you think about things that are scary or challenging, it's like you could think about it like a heavy weight. If the weight is easy to lift, you're not going to build any muscle. So like that you have that sensation of fear or hesitation or doubt, one way to think about it is that it's a positive sign. Like Stephen Pressfield talks about that the resistance you feel is commensurate with like the value. So like you're not afraid to do things that don't matter. You're only afraid to do like big things that matter. So the harder or the scarier it is, the more valuable that thing is for you sometimes? I would say a lot of the times, not all the time. Maybe it's scary because you're about to, implode or drive off a cliff for no reason. Like it's not that fear has no place, but it could be a sign that you're on the cusp of something. And so when I think about it, I go like, okay, if I'm not pushing myself, if I'm not scary, that's probably a sign that I'm just doing something that I'm already really comfortable with and therefore not growing. So I think it's good. It's a good sign. But I think the reason it's scary, you said you can't like outthink it. I don't know. I disagree a little bit. What I would say is that oftentimes the reason we're scared about it is because we haven't really thought about it. So we have these kind of like vague fears, like, well, I don't want to do it because, and then you're like, because why? Like, tell me what you're really thinking about.
The worst thing will happen because I get made fun of, because I'll lose my money.
It's actually not that big a deal. Like, I talk in the book, there's this story about Pericles. He's this great Athenian general, and he's leading these troops in a naval convoy, and there's suddenly like there's an eclipse. And like, imagine living
solar eclipse.
Thousands of years ago, you don't know what an eclipse is. Just all of a sudden, in the middle of the day, it gets dark, right? And so everyone's scared, and they thought, is this like an omen? Is this the gods? Are they angry? And there's a similar story where like thunder happens, and they're like, what is that noise? What's going on? And he just goes like, so it's plunged into darkness, and he grabs his cloak and he puts it over this guy's head, and he goes like, are you scared of this? The guy goes, no. And he's like, but it's just darkness. He's like, what does it matter if the darkness is because the sun disappears or because like I put, my cloak over your head? So I think some of the times we're scared because we haven't really thought about what it is. And so it's kind of this enormous boogeyman that if we actually took a minute and we broke it down and we thought about it, it wouldn't be as scary as it was. So I agree that you want to go head on, but part of head on is just like, what am I actually afraid of here? Like, what is this?
Right.
And it's not nearly as big as you think it is.
I hear you there. For me, I guess the thing that I'm thinking of is like, when I was a teenager, I was terrified of talking to girls.
Sure.
And I wasn't able to outthink it and be like, okay, they're just going to laugh at you and then you're going to be fine. I almost needed to like experience it and realize physically I'm okay.
Yeah.
Same thing with salsa dancing. I was like fascinated by watching salsa dancers, but I was terrified to get laughed at.
Sure.
And to look like out of place and not in the right cultural fit. And for months, I was paralyzed at the idea of like looking silly, making someone else look bad, getting laughed at, not fitting in, not belonging, all these things, just not understanding the language of salsa dancing. And finally, I did it for the first time in the middle of, I don't know, probably 100 dancers. And I was shaking, trembling, terrified. And I remember after about 10 minutes, I looked up and no one cared. No one was watching me, no one's looking at me. But I don't think I'd have been to outthink it because the fear was in my body. And it was almost like I needed to physically do the action and feel it until I was like, okay, I'm still not comfortable in this situation. But like Batman, he had to live in the cave. He didn't just say, well, let me just think I'm a bat. He was like, I need to become the bat. I need to live with the bats and let them swarm around me and realize like, I'm not that afraid, or it's okay. I can learn to embrace this discomfort as opposed to outthink the fear.
I remember one time I was sitting in a cafe on Houston Street and you walked by and you...
In New York?
Yeah. It was like, it had like a glass wall and all of a sudden I heard this knocking on the door. It was you.
Yeah.
And you were like, hey, I'm going salsa dancing. You want to come? And I just remember thinking like, I would literally rather die than do that because that's
it's terrifying.
But I do think physically experiencing it can be really valuable because you realize, it wasn't what you thought it was. But it is interesting. So like you're afraid of salsa dancing, talking to girls. At the same time, you were playing football at an elite level.
Yes.
You were going up for passes, getting smacked by someone running full. Like you could literally.
It's still scary though.
You could literally die.
Yes.
Like you were not afraid to be hit basically by like a car.
Right.
And yet you were scared of what people thought. So it's like it's funny because when we think about courage, we tend to think of physical courage as being like the end all be all.
I almost feel like it's easier to run into a building that's on fire than it is to like go up and talk to your crush when you're like terrified of the rejection. Because maybe physical instincts would be like, I'm gonna go rescue this person out of a car, out of a crash. Like I would just get up and go, but I would be like, as a teenager, this girl's gonna laugh at me and all my friends are gonna laugh at me and I'm not gonna be accepted and no one's gonna love me and I'm gonna die alone.
Well, there's war heroes that run for political office that then are afraid to vote against their party because people will be mad at them. Or they could lose their job.
So different types of courage, right?
Yeah, so we often think of physical courage as the end all be all, but I would actually argue that moral courage
is hardest
and more rare. And the tricky thing is that people will have one and not the other, and it could go in either direction. But that's really the tricky thing.
What has been the hard before you wrote this book? Because I feel like every book you write, There's always like something in you of like, I got to write this because I know I haven't been fully mastered this thing yet.
Of course.
So where were you lacking courage in your life before or during writing this book? Was there parts, or maybe it was years ago that you've mastered now, but what was the thing maybe that was the hardest for you to have courage around?
So, I mean, I've gone through scary things in my life, whether it was dropping out of college, the decision to leave the corporate world to become a writer. These are all scary things. And even the decision to like go from the marketing track I was on to writing books about an obscure school of ancient philosophy. Like that was, I took a major hit in the advances. It didn't work right away. I was worried whether people were going to like it or not. But I do, one of the last stories in the book, I talk about when I was at American Apparel. And I think one of the scariest things that people face is like, if I do this, I could lose my job, right? Even though this might be a job they're thinking about quitting, like at that very moment, we had this huge mental block between quitting and being fired, right? Yeah. And I was the story I tell is I was thinking about leaving American Apparel to become a writer, and then I get asked to do this sort of unethical thing at work, and I say I'm not going to do it. I don't do it, but that was as far as I took it. I didn't want to stop. Like I didn't want to go toe to toe to stop it from happening. Right. And
you just said, I'm not going to do this, but you knew it was still happening.
I said, that's a bad idea. I'm not going to do it. Find somebody else. But I could have said, like, that's not right. Don't do that. Right. And I didn't have to watch as it happened. And I think back, I go, why? And it was like, well, you didn't want to lose your job.
Right.
A job that I left shortly thereafter anyway. And I think what I think about in retrospect is like, why did I want to keep a job that you could get fired from for doing the right thing? And so I think it's the reason I tell the story is that I wanted to make an important point, which is the excuse, I was worried about X or I was afraid of Y, does not age well. Like when you look back, you're never glad that you chickened out. Like you never are.
That's the truth.
And so, I think I don't want the book to come across as like, I'm super brave. This is my story. The story is, the book is, here are inspiring people throughout history whose courage is calling to us to be better. And like, I actually end the book not with a story of courage, but a story of a failure of courage, because I think that's really, like, it's funny, if you should be afraid of anything, it should be afraid of, like, you should be afraid of betraying your principles, of falling short, of not doing what you know is the right but hard thing at the time.
How does someone develop their principles or their values if they're not clear on them? Or if they were taught like different values by their parents, by society, by friends in high school, college. How did they get clear on those core things?
I mean, I think you develop them as you go. And that's why you can't be too hard on yourself when you fall short, because that's one of the ways you are learning.
How you learn, yeah.
Yeah.
By being a coward.
Yes.
By making the mistake of being a coward, you learn through pain.
Yes.
You should have done it differently.
Well, and you learn, like the self-preservation that you were trying to, that you were following, it's not a guarantee anyway.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you're like, oh, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to piss off this or that. And it's like, you're assuming that it's yours anyway, that you have control of it, and you don't. And so it's kind of like, it's like the Stoics talk about memento mori, right? One of the benefits of memento mori is like, actually life is too short to try to hang on to it too tight anyway.
Yeah.
But I think you develop your compass. One of the ways I think you do it is like, who are your heroes? Like, who do you look up to?
The models, yeah.
What would they do in this situation? What is the code that they lived by? That could be your grandparents. It could be your spouse. It could be Jesus. It could be Marcus Aurelius. It could be anyone from history. It could be a character from your favorite book. Like, what would they do? I think that's a really key way to do it. But
interesting.
What this book, and then the series of books is built around what's called the Cardinal Virtues, which are actually the virtues in Christianity and Stoicism, actually appear in a bunch of different philosophical schools. But the idea is courage, self-discipline, justice, wisdom. So to me, that's kind of what those are the principles that I try to live by. And I think every situation that we face calls for one or all of those things.
Where do you think people lack courage the most? In what parts of their life? Is it in just being honest with themselves? Is it in how they lie to other people? Is it in how they don't stand up for what's right, or at least what they believe is right? Is it physical courage, emotional courage,
I think it's all of the above, and I think it's important. It's like no one is like fully brave or fully a coward, right? Like it's more like day in and day out. What do you do? Right? But I think one of the places we struggle with the most is like if courage is rare, courage in pursuit of the right thing is rarer still. So the virtues are interrelated, right? Like one of the stories I tell in the book is, okay, think about Michael Jordan. The decision for Michael Jordan to walk away from basketball
and play baseball.
Immense courage, right? Think of the amount of people who told him it's a bad idea, told him he couldn't make it, wasn't going to work. I think of the money he left aside, right? Real courage. But I contrast that with Maya Moore leaving equally dominant in the WNBA. She leaves at the height of her career, not to go play a different sport, not to go on some spiritual pursuit, not to, spend time with her family, but to free a man wrongly convicted who's spending his life in jail. So courage is important, right? The courage to I'm going to quit my job and start a company. Great, very courageous. But the person who quits a job to dedicate themselves to some meaningful cause, that's to me the level above. I think it's courage, but courage in pursuit of what, right? We all know people who are savvy investors. They're great at taking risk, managing risk. They're bold. They're making cool. But is it in service of their bank account, or is it in service of doing something that matters?
Right. Where do you feel like you struggle the most with courage still?
I think that's a good example. The story I'm telling is where I continue to struggle. It's really hard to say or do things that will have financial or career repercussions for you.
Right.
Right. So, I think early in my career, I was like, I guess I've said this to people where it's like, I was happy to be here or happy to be wanted. Mm-hmm. So I would go this is the opportunity. I'm excited, grateful, let's do it. Not does this align with my values? Do I feel like this makes the world a better place?
Right.
So, but it wasn't greed so much that was motivating me, but a fear of what would happen if I said no. So I often find myself saying yes or not objecting or being fully articulating what I think and feel because I don't want to be on the outside or I don't want to rock the boat, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what I've been working on is just this is what I think, this is what I feel needs to be done, come what may. I'm trying to get to a place where that is consistently who I am and what I do. But it's scary because first off, what if the opportunities dry up because of it, right? And then I think as I've gotten older and you have more responsibilities, you realize it doesn't just affect you. It affects the people who work for you.
Yeah, your kids, your family.
Exactly. Yeah. So people will go along to get along, right? Mm-hmm. And that's so one of the things that's done is given me some empathy. I have a chapter in the book about basically never question, the title of the chapter is Never Question Another Man's Courage. Meaning, we watch, we're why are these bums in Washington? Why is the mayor doing this? Or why isn't LeBron James speaking up about, right. Why isn't LeBron James speaking up about what's going on in China, right? And it's why don't you speak up about what's wrong in your industry, right? So it's very easy to get in this trap where you're criticizing other people's courage or lack thereof, instead of doing what we should be doing. What we should take from these examples is what am I putting on the line, You know,
Right.
what deals am I torching?
How am I stepping up?
Exactly. We look at a politician, we go, why won't they vote for this or that? Who cares if they don't get reelected? You know? And it's like, well, they care. And so it's like, when have you gambled your career? You know, like what stands have you taken where you're like, this is unpopular, but I feel morally obligated to do it. And I'm willing to accept the consequences of that. One of my favorite things for the Stoics in self-discipline would be the reminder that it's called self-discipline. You can't hold other people to your standards.
Okay.
Marcus Aurelius says, tolerant with others, strict with yourself.
Say again, tolerate?
Tolerant with others, strict with yourself.